They didn't need to say it out loud. It was in the way their eyes flicked over her thrifted coat, the way silence seemed to sharpen as she entered the room, not hostile, just dismissive. Ariana. Wells stepped through the heavy glass doors of room 214 at Kingsbridge Institute, and in that moment, the room told her exactly what it thought. You don't belong here. She'd heard that before, though, never in words. Words were too easy. It was the quiet pauses, the polite smiles stretched a beat too long, the way people subtly angled their bodies away from hers, in labs, libraries, and interviews. You learn to hear the silences when you've spent a lifetime listening to them. She crossed the room, slowly, her laptop bag swinging softly at her side. Rows of students had already filled the tiered seats most, in pressed blazers and sleek cardigans, their conversations laced with names like Stanford Phillips Exeter, IBM internships, and Dad's firm. She didn't recognize the language. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Ariana was 26. Older than most in this room. She didn't come here straight from high school with scholarship banners and AP medals. She came from the logistics floor of a freight warehouse, from the night shift at a gas station, where she studied MATLAB between transactions. She had pieced together brilliance the way some people piece together rent quietly, without margin for error. Now here she was, a first-year systems engineering graduate student at one of the most competitive programs in the country. The kind of place where being exceptional was assumed and being ordinary was disqualifying. She took a seat near the front where the scrutiny was sharpest. There was no place to hide. She flipped open her notebook with deliberate calm and let the room size her up. Behind her, the room buzzed with the low hum of pre-class ritual. Chairs creaked, laptops clicked open. Someone behind her whispered, "She's the one from community college, right?" Another voice chuckled, not cruelly, just confidently. "Let's see how long that lasts." Ariana didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She'd been in this scene before, not this room, not these faces, but the same script, a place where intelligence had a dress code, where being smart wasn't enough, unless it came wrapped in the right accent, the right last name, the right legacy. She breathed in slow and steady. This wasn't new. The front wall of room 214 loomed with whiteboard panels stretching from floor to ceiling. It reminded her of a performance stage, except here the applause was silence, and the spotlight came from a professor's narrowed eyes. A single equation on that board could turn a name into a legend or reduce a student to a cautionary tale. And today Ariana had a feeling that something would happen. Not because she wanted it, but because there's something in the air when pressure builds just right, the moment before a storm, the stillness before the lightning. She felt it settling over the room, and somewhere beneath the judgment, the doubt, and the designer jackets, she felt something else stirring in the silence. Anticipation. The door clicked shut behind him with surgical finality. Dr. Nathaniel Crane entered like a blade, sharp suit, sharp eyes, and sharper silence. The casual noise in the room evaporated the instant his heel touched the floor. He didn't speak right away. He never did. His presence alone did the speaking. Ariana didn't flinch. She had read about him long before arriving at Kingsbridge, a decorated expert in nonlinear systems, tenured for 35 years, and infamous for his teaching philosophy. Pressure reveals truth. His lectures were known for their brilliance, yes, but also their body count. Bright students proud, students hopeful, students all tested in front of others, made examples of. In real time, those who survived became stronger. Those who didn't switched departments. Dr. Crane walked to the center of the room, placed his tablet on the podium, and tapped it twice. The whiteboard behind him flickered to life with a cold blue glow. Then, without warning, his gaze swept the class and landed directly on Ariana. "Miss Wells," he said, stretching the name like he was unsure how it tasted. "You've joined us from Community College of Eastern Ohio. Yes?" A ripple of movement passed through the class. Some raised eyebrows, others tried to hide amused smirks. Ariana didn't blink. "Yes, sir." Crane nodded slowly. "Welcome to Kingsbridge." His tone was even, but beneath it, something else. A challenge. "Let's see what foundations you're working with." He turned to the board. With deliberate movements, he began writing an equation. Not one from the textbook, not even from the lecture notes. It sprawled across the board in segments, coupled differential systems, nonlinear feedback loops, time-dependent variables. A real monster, the kind professors save for doctoral defenses. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Crane capped the marker. "Let's solve this together," he said. "Please show us how you'd begin." Ariana looked up, then stood. She knew what this was. Not a test. A performance, a public vetting. The room wasn't waiting for her to succeed. It was waiting for her to fail, politely, quietly, without blood, but with consequence. Her failure wouldn't make headlines. It would just confirm what most already suspected: she didn't belong here. She walked slowly to the front. Her boots made no sound on the polished tile. Dr. Crane handed her the marker, his fingers barely brushing hers. No smile, no encouragement. She turned toward the equation. It stared back at her like a gate no one expected her to open. The problem was brutal, not for its content but its implications. It wasn't just difficult. It was designed not to be solved, but to be survived. Ariana stared at it, marker in hand, the class watching every breath. There was a way to start the standard way. Break the system into parts, solve incrementally, follow procedure, show that she knew the basics. That would be safe, that would get her out of this unscathed. But there was also something else. A thread buried inside the equation, a structural inefficiency, a hidden repetition in the Jacobian that could be bypassed entirely if you rewrote the constraints. It would save 3 steps in 5 minutes. It would also go against the exact poof Dr. Crane expected. And she saw it instantly, like breathing. Most wouldn't risk it, but Ariana wasn't here to be safe. She had spent too long outside rooms like this to walk into one now and shrink. Her fingers closed around the marker. She chose her path. The first stroke hit the board with quiet precision. At first there was nothing, just the dry hiss of marker on whiteboard, the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their seat. But then a flicker, students leaned in. She wasn't solving the problem like they had expected. She had taken a different route, one that looked foreign and fast, yet terrifyingly logical. Her notation was clean, elegant. She made no unnecessary marks, no pauses. Line after line, the monster on the board began to shrink. Even the ones who hadn't been paying attention now watched with still eyes. In the back row, someone whispered, "Wait, is she skipping the eigenvector isolation?" Another voice, hesitant but impressed. "She's compressing the system dynamics." Dr. Crane's arms crossed. Ariana reached the midpoint of the problem. She stopped, checked her work, not out of doubt, but discipline. Her hand steadied, then she continued. A minute later, she stepped back, boxed her final answer. The room was silent. Crane approached the board, slowly, carefully. He examined each step with the kind of scrutiny that could make equations unravel, but nothing unraveled. Finally, he spoke. "Unusual," he said dryly, "but correct." And then another voice, one soft, clear, and new, actually said, Dr. Valerie Chen. Rising from her seat in the back, "It's better than correct. It's refined." The silence cracked, and in the fracture, Ariana didn't smile. She simply handed the marker back and walked to her seat. Dr. Crane didn't move. He stood at the board, eyes tracing Ariana's work, like he was reading something in a language he wasn't fluent in, familiar enough to understand, but foreign enough to unsettle. He wasn't just checking for correctness. He was searching for a flaw, a misstep, a justification for what had just happened. But there was none. Each line was precise, each simplification mathematically sound, every bypass step intentional, not careless. She hadn't just solved the problem, she had redefined its structure. That kind of insight couldn't be taught. It had to be earned somewhere between fatigue and obsession. He turned slowly to the room. "Unconventional," he said again this time. Softer, but correct. The class, frozen in quiet surprise, shifted, not with applause, not with gasps, but with something subtler, a recalibration of judgment. Heads tilted, pens scribbled, eyes once indifferent. Now followed her as she walked back to her seat. And then, "That wasn't just correct," Dr. Chen said, rising fully this time. "That was a better solution than I've seen presented in my own graduate seminars." She wasn't smiling, but her tone carried a certain weight. One the students recognized. One Crane couldn't ignore. It was endorsement, not from a peer but from a challenger. Crane's jaw tightened just barely. He looked back at the board as though it might suddenly reveal the weakness he'd missed. But there was no weakness. There was only Ariana Wells. Dr. Crane didn't like losing the room. He was used to being the final voice in it, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. Years of published papers, Grant's guest lectures across the world. And yet, in a matter of minutes, a quiet transfer student had shifted that balance without saying more than a dozen words. He reached for his tablet again. Another problem appeared on the board, this one more brutal than the first. Dense with constraints, non-linear elements embedded in time series. The kind of equation that required strategy, not just endurance. The room stiffened. Miss Wells Crane said with deliberate calm, "Let's see if your method holds up here." It wasn't a request. It was a second swing, one that could flatten even the brightest student if they approached it without care. Ariana stood. She didn't look rattled. She didn't look victorious either. She simply walked back to the front. Marker in hand, she studied the new challenge. A heartbeat passed. 2. Then she began. There was no hesitation this time. Ariana worked with a rhythm that didn't rush but didn't pause either. Her hands moved smoothly as if the solution had been waiting in her head all along, and now it was simply being released onto the board. No dramatics, no apologies. Only math. Some students leaned forward. Others whispered to each other, not with skepticism this time, but curiosity. She's simplifying the exponential decay directly. Wait, how did she spot that pattern so fast? She reached the final constraint, resolved it, boxed her answer, and capped the marker. Then she turned. That's the solution. Dr. Chen stood up first. That, she said with quiet clarity, is nothing short of genius. The room responded not with noise, but stillness. The kind that comes when people realize they're watching something they don't fully understand yet, but know they'll remember. Crane said nothing. He looked at the board, unreadable. But the silence said enough. The class sat in suspension, caught in the moment between shift and response. Crane walked slowly to the board. His eyes scanned her solution, his face neutral, his breath shallow. He was a man recalibrating his authority in real time. She has a unique approach, he said finally. Dr. Chen cut in without looking at him. It's not unique, she said. It's advanced. She didn't guess her way there. She restructured the system in fewer steps with less computation. That's not clever, that's mastery. Crane said nothing. A student, one of the louder skeptics from earlier, raised a tentative hand. Professor, could she maybe explain how she saw that shortcut? I honestly wouldn't have thought to tackle it like that. Another followed. Yeah, I'm curious too. Crane hesitated. The room once his to command now belonged to someone else. Dr. Chen turned to Ariana. Would you mind walking us through your reasoning? Ariana blinked, not because she didn't want to, but because she'd never been asked before. She nodded, then picked up the marker again. She didn't perform, she explained. Measured, thoughtful, clear. She broke the equation down into parts, showing how she spotted redundant variables in the coefficients, how she shifted the axis to remove complexity before it even appeared. As she spoke, the class took notes not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Even Crane watched his expression still but quietly distant, as if he knew the power had already left his hands. When she finished, she placed the marker down and returned to her seat. This time, the path back felt different. The glances weren't cold or questioning. They were contemplative, respectful, curious. Class ended. Students packed slowly as if they didn't want to leave just yet. A boy who had laughed at her earlier hesitated by her desk. That was impressive, he offered. She didn't look up, I know. He let out a surprised chuckle, not mocking, just honest. She slung her bag over her shoulder, and left. The world didn't erupt into applause. But the silence behind her was no longer dismissal. It was awe. Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to gold, the kind of late afternoon light that makes even old concrete glow. Ariana pulled out her phone. A text had come through. Eli, how was day one? She smiled, typed back. Ariana, same as usual, except I made Crane eat his own words. The typing dots popped up immediately. Eli, no way, what happened? She thought for a second, then replied, Ariana. He thought he could embarrass me. He embarrassed himself instead. She slipped the phone back into her coat. Her steps were lighter now, not because she'd won anything, but because something had shifted not just in that classroom, but in the quiet corners of the system itself. The kind of shift no one announces, but everyone feels. She hadn't just solved an equation, she had rewritten who gets to hold the marker. And she wasn't giving it back. If you've ever walked into a room where no one expected you to succeed, remember this. You don't need permission to be brilliant. You don't need validation to be worthy. Your mind is your own, and when it speaks, let it roar in silence. If this story inspired you, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what quiet strength can do.